Why awake am I still haunted by figures draped in static shrouds and breathing air awash with all their artifice? Why awake do I still travel, chasing, fleeing, immaterial forms that want my soul that lives in my attention? Shadows, stick to your dimension.
Whoa, that was like a poetry slam delivery of that poem, Aaron. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome back to Solacene, everyone. We are happy to have you. This is the next addition to our storytelling series, and this week are some topics that seem very poignant with the state of the world.
You think?
I think so.
I guess our topics are like nicely clumped. Today we're talking about immersion and all its various pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about our relationship to characters in the various popular mediums of the day. And we're talking about the Solacene theatre that we're designing.
Are we?
No, we're not. I just wanted to mention that because that's a question that's been postponed for next week, because otherwise today's episode would have been very crowded.
Very long. There would have been a lot of diagrams, a lot of pulling up of references that we did not have time for. So we're going to add that next week. But our fourth question is about comedy in the Solacene, which as an aspiring stand-up comedian is a very exciting conversation topic for me.
And just as a little note before we get into the discussion, Field Notes. Field Notes is this semester's version of the zine. It's entirely digital. It's entirely free. You can sign up in the description. It's like a weekly letter that we send to you.
Sometimes there's drawings. Sometimes there's pictures. Sometimes there's diagrams. I'm very into the diagrams lately.
Yeah.
And so you'll receive that in your inbox, and we will be in touch with you. So please join us because they're really fun to write. I don't really write much, but this is a great outlet for me.
All right. I do write a lot, so I don't know. The speaking in this podcast is a good outlet for me, I guess. Mm-hmm. We're starting out by talking about our relationship to characters on TV versus in movies. And this is a question simultaneously so niche and so broad that I actually had a weird time trying to answer it or really come up with any articulate thoughts about it. Where I started really was children, because obviously that's where we all started with TV and movies. Mm-hmm. I just had this thought, which was that kids might have a better sense of what is real and what is fictional than even do adults, which seems kind of counterintuitive to our understanding of, maturity and how we interact with art and media and stories. But I just always remember, and just from what I've seen with children, when they're watching TV, they're like, oh, this is the funny thing that's on the box. Mm-hmm. And you kind of intuitively know, and I think it might be because kids' programming is brighter, TV and movies, and even when it's humans and not cartoons, they are not acting like kids see humans act in the real world for the most part, whereas our stories, which we tend to follow as adults, typically are much more naturalistic. They might be a little bit more extreme, they're criminals or whatever, but they're typically humans acting like humans.
Yeah.
So this is where I started, because I just think that as a kid, you don't feel that much of a difference between your TV characters that you watch and your movie characters. Mm-hmm. Maybe this is also because kids tend to rewatch movies so much.
Yeah, and kids' movies are often much shorter. The TV shows are a similar budget. As a way to sum up what they are. Like, they're a similar...
The production is quite similar, yeah.
Yeah, level of art. Whereas with adult TV shows, there's quite a lot of variation in these shows.
That's true.
But very few of them reach cinema.
Prestige.
Yeah.
Some of them.
Some of them do.
Right. I had a quote that was kind of pertinent to this, which was, this is all over the place. Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Which is a song that we sing quite often. And I was going to recite the whole poem at the start of this. Okay. But at the start of the episode, but I thought it would sound a little bit too kind of horror movie-esque.
It probably would have.
How they always take the lullabies.
Like it would have, yeah.
And have some indie singer doing them behind the chilling imagery.
Yeah, someone would tune in for the first time and think it was one of those murder mystery podcasts.
Exactly.
They'd be like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
But what happened on Sesame Street?
Big Bad? But that line in particular, can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? I just thought it's funny because Sesame Street, in that song, it's almost like this surreal
like the Muffin Man.
theatrical Muffin Man. Yeah, it's like it doesn't exist. Even in the show's logic, it's like, well, this is a set. You know, I love watching Sesame Street because it looks so unreal. Theatrical, yeah. And I just thought it was kind of a Solacene analog there.
Yeah, I think so as well. I like the point you made about there being a bigger distinction between reality and fiction and kids programming. Yeah. Kids' brains actually do have a hard time distinguishing those, as far as I know, about childhood psychology. And adults do have more of an awareness. But I think because of what we watch, like an adult watching Sesame Street very much knows that it's fake. But kids know that it's fake, but it's much more influential on them.
Of course it's influential, but what I mean is like adults watching, let's say, I don't know, Stranger Things. It's like we know it's not real more than kids know that Sesame Street's not real.
Yes.
But we kind of take it for granted that our brain can discern it from reality. And sometimes I think
it can't.
Yeah.
There's this hypothesis that adults cannot tell the difference, and that it was this study done during isolation, which is a very good time to do a study like this, on whether or not engaging with a show like Friends or The Office or whatever your comfort show is actually benefits you mentally from the negative impacts of isolation, be it self-inflicted or global.
External, yeah.
Yeah. And the hypothesis is that, yes, it would help replace human interactions. And the study proved it or confirmed it. There was a correlation between feeling less lonely and watching TV. But then my hypothesis, and I talked to several of my psychology friends to see if I was just a rando hypothesizing. And they said, no, there's actually a lot of research into this as well. And what this is my hypothesis that it kind of delays the feelings of loneliness, because when you almost break the simulation that, oh, these are just people acting on a screen.
Yeah.
It almost makes the fallout much worse than if you had just confronted the fact that, okay, I'm going to be lonely. Okay, I'm isolating. Maybe I need to interact with people. If you had have confronted it up front, it would have been better than this fallout of like delayed isolation.
Right, I got you.
Yeah.
That's why I ended my poem with shadows stick to your dimension.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I don't know, who's a character in The Office?
Pam.
Pam's two-dimensional.
She is.
I mean, she might be a really well-written character. I don't know. I've never seen the show. I'm not saying she's a two-dimensional constructed in terms of her writing, but she doesn't exist. Like, Pam's not real.
Exactly.
But I'm sure we can still laugh with Pam, cry with her, you know, have fun with her, whatever they do in offices.
Yeah.
But Pam's just spam. Pale imitation of ham.
Yeah, this is your inner poet coming out, Mr. Seuss. But yeah, my answer to this question, the difference between TV and movie characters, like our relationships to them, is that I really do feel like with movies, we watch it as a piece of art for the most part. Unless you're a kid, you're not rewatching it and having those ups and downs with the characters. And yeah, you can relate to the character for that 2-hour period, but really it's not the same as watching a TV show. Watching a TV show, especially if you're watching something that comes out every week, you're literally scheduling a time to hang out with these people, these characters.
See what's going on with them.
Yeah, and then there's a lot more mundane things, so it makes you feel even more connected to them. Oh, I'm just watching them wash their dishes and have a conversation with their partner, and it's just a lot more intimate than in a film where it's more of a highlight. It's more like a piece of art in a cinema or a theater.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of if we were to generalize, what I was interested in was the fact that they're not actually two distinct categories. Maybe they perhaps once were, but the most popular movies today, of course, are all a long serial that resemble much more classic television than they do classic film. And this has been, for as long as there's been movies, there's been sequels where people are like, oh, I know that guy, I've seen him before, or adaptations, I've read him before, that's interesting. And I actually think that television, looking at it historically, because, I mean, it's important to note that both these different mediums, if we're to call them that, have only been around for a blink in the grand scheme of storytelling. TV resembles more mythology. a cast of characters and let's see what they're up to today. And also books, I think, was often, comics. Those were around before television. Movies are more like paintings or plays. They're a one-time thing.
Yep.
And they're more discreet like that. I think the biggest difference today is how we consume these, and we'll get into these a little bit later when we talk about immersion. Binging, compared to it being a one-time or a once-a-week event or something like that. It's like a whenever I want event. Like that's something hugely different. I think that movies, the way that I feel about them is that the characters feel more like they are in a story because it's enclosed. And part of the reason I think is just the logistical. Most often before we go see a movie in the theaters, or sometimes when you see it on streaming, you'll wonder how long is it? So it's like 95 minutes, and we know that this character is only going to be with us, or rather we're only going to be with them, kind of peering in to their exploits for about 95 minutes.
Yeah.
With a television show, especially when it's still ongoing, you don't know. Like when Stranger Things, I don't know if that's finished or whatever, but like when it first started, no one knew how many seasons it was going to go for. So it's this weird thing. And also with that, I don't think even just television resembles more mythology or comics or, earlier forms of stories, but it resembles more real life because, as I say, you don't know when it's going to end. You spend more time with the characters. It's a lot more intimate. As you mentioned, you see them washing the dishes. You see them all, like if it's a sitcom or something, you will see them all in the same locales, in the same way that in real life, you have your cast of characters that you see in the office or at the coffee shop or at the bar or whatever it may be. Like that's how TV is. So that's another similarity. And also cancellation, the dreaded cancellation is like death. You never know when it's going to come. And when it does, it kills the characters.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot more naturalistic, I guess is the word for it. And I don't like that about it. Because I feel like it pulls our mind in too many different directions. And a little bit more about the psychology that I was reading into is like, okay, I visit, you're a bad example, you're my husband, but I visit my friend once a week. I see her for like 3 hours.
Yeah.
And it's not even once a week, every week. Sometimes we have to cancel or what have you.
So it's like a TV show, basically.
Yeah. But the thing is, I'm watching Seinfeld every single day for a year.
Yeah.
Just one episode a day, but it's constant. And so that neural pathway of like the social desire in your brain gets really strong, and it's stronger than the one of me seeing my real friend.
Yeah.
So it's like that experience is almost more legitimate and more real than seeing my friend. But that never happens with a movie. No. Even if it's the MCU, it's like you get to watch your favorite movies a few times a year, your favorite series or whatever it is. But it's still not going to ever really take over real life.
I agree with that. I do think that can be a problem. So I was kind of trying to answer it in the Solacene way, as in how are these things in the Solacene? Yes. And I think that television is a great art form. I think there's a lot of TV shows that are just as beautiful as many films. They can have a ton of artistic merit, both in their writing and in the cinema of it, even if it's on a small screen. I think that there's also a lot of television, as you alluded to, with the variation that is bad for us. And I don't think we need to name names, but
certain days of our lives. But I was thinking, like, so in the Solacene, I asked myself, like, what will they be like in the Solacene? And I said, there won't be soap operas that go on for 30 years. Because it really feels like when you sit down to watch an episode of a soap opera, I don't know how it is in other countries, but you watch UK soap operas, and I've watched a lot of American soap operas. The lowest low. It's just like, it's basically those paperback books that are sold in supermarkets. They're like churned out so quick and just so, it doesn't even make sense, but you're sucked in because you've been committed to it for 15 years.
That's what I don't like about, I like when art has an end in sight, because otherwise I just assume it's to make money and to keep people hooked. I assume that's the only purpose of it, like a drug or something.
Yeah. The best TV shows start with an end in sight.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like Seinfeld, I know that they set out, and I think they said they wouldn't do more than 10 seasons. And then they were like, when the 9th season rolled around, they were like, no, there's no more story.
Yeah.
To keep making it just for money.
Narrative ones, I mean, though.
Yeah.
Because there are certain shows also that at one point it was like, this is gripping, and maybe it's genuinely touching on the human condition. And I feel this in the same way that I'm reading literature, and I feel that, and it's meaningful and it's artistic. But you can almost see the point in which it just becomes a bunch of nonsense. We're going to keep adding cliffhangers so that you watch next week.
We'll bring characters back to life.
Yeah.
Just things that don't make any sense, but it's because it's like, oh, well, that's what people want.
Yeah.
There's always a turning point with shows, unless they're very intentional with, this is the story I want to tell, like Sherlock or Schitt's Creek all did that.
That's actually the other point about this is what fans want. Television is much more beholden, I think, because of its form to fan demand and like fan service and things like this. There's almost a closer relationship between the viewers of the TV show to the creators, the cast, the writers, etc., than there is with a discrete film, of course, because that's more of a one-time production rather than an ongoing thing. And I really don't think the former is a good thing, because it's almost like the antithesis of art, which is a creative vision enacted. This is just like, I don't know, some weird circus populism. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, I do. I think Sherlock was one of those shows that had that as an issue.
The third season?
I'm not sure. Supernatural is a famous example where it's like the fans have a weird sway. Yeah. I like this quote always with regards to writing, but I think it goes with any creative act, which is that like if you show someone a draft, like someone who's not a writer, this sounds like, I'm not trying to be like arrogant about it because I'm not a good writer either, but if you show someone a draft and they will most often, and they read it, they'll most often be able to tell if something's up, but they won't be able to tell how to fix it because they're not a writer. So it's like that with TV shows, I think, and fans and things. I mean, taking into account what will please audiences, you know, basically what's good, makes a lot of sense. But in terms of having like a referendum on like, oh, should we bring this character back? That doesn't make any sense because it's not artistic.
One more point I had on these things in the Solacene is that to replace the MCU, I think that's not a great thing. There won't be these super long franchises happening in the Solacene. Okay. But those would be replaced by longer TV shows. Like I'm imagining, instead of, like Sherlock's the only reference I have for like those hour-long 3 episodes in a season. Like kind of like that, but the MCU, it's like, okay, it's like it would still be a TV show. It wouldn't be a box office thing. The box office would be films, but I think there could be more short films, more one-off productions shown in the cinemas. Whereas right now there's not really a space for short films because it's like it isn't a TV show, but it also isn't a feature length. So I think a little bit more just art in the cinemas, and then the long narratives can kind of go to TV and then cut the tail end of media that is the soap opera and the...
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So it's like cinemas, you go there to see nice movies. TV, you go there to watch nice TV shows. Yes. I mean, my only problem really with the Marvel movies is that they squish cinemas so that there's no room for anything else to be playing. I think that's a really sad thing.
But I feel like they could be on TV and it's almost a similar experience. Perhaps there's viewings.
Yeah, I think they can be in cinemas. I think it's genuinely a good thing that people go. Like not many other movies get people to go to the movies.
True.
So I think it's a nice thing that there's a story that everyone's watching together. Generally speaking, much like, similar to Stranger Things, similar to how people used to read Dickens, episodic, similar to, I don't know, how people used to tell the Odyssey. Yeah. I think it's a nice thing. It does touch into my last point on this, which was that in the Solacene TV, because I think it infects TV. I know we're talking about the Disney movies and they're kind of famously focus grouped, but I think TV, especially when I scroll through Netflix sometimes, it just seems so kind of algorithm driven and
it's just like
soulless,
appealing to the basic human instincts. It's like they look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the bottom part of the pyramid. They're like, yes, let's make TV shows about this instead of TV shows about self-actualization and family and love. They're like survival.
Yeah, I definitely think they appeal to the bad parts of our brain.
Yeah.
So I think in general, in the Solacene, TV will be a little bit more just real. Yeah. Real stuff. Not just like me or you could make a Netflix show right now.
We could.
We could pitch one and it would be...
Well, I mean, I could probably make a list right now of things that I think are on Netflix, and they probably are right. This will be a game.
Okay.
I'm going to list 5 things that are probably shows on Netflix, and you can double check on your TV.
Okay.
Dogs.
Yeah. That's just the name of the show? Dogs with an exclamation point?
They're all going to be like this. Dogs. There will be one just called, like, Dallas. There's going to be one called...
Can I name one?
Yeah.
Bodies.
Bodies?
Yeah, because I think that's what all the thumbnails are. Netflix knows that sex sells, and that's what all their shows are.
Exactly. Bodies. I like that.
So we've got Dogs, Dallas, Bodies.
Salt.
Yeah, Salt is a show.
Salt is a show?
But the next one's going to be how to hide a body. Because there's always a crime show, right?
Yeah.
So I think those are the 5.
Yeah,
it's like Inside Out.
There.
It's like Inside Out with our 5 emotions. That's what Netflix with their shows.
So you might not be Dallas, but it's definitely Michigan or something like just a random state. Speaking of states, this week's organism of the week is... Do you want to tell them what I've been doing with this picture?
I don't know what you've been doing with it.
Hiding it.
Oh yeah, you've been hiding that all day.
Yeah, because it's so funny. Are we ready to see it?
The beaver. And it says, lunch. It's a really kind of nicely drawn picture of a beaver with maybe some elongated limbs gnawing on a trunk of wood, as beavers do.
Yeah. So Aaron and I have been talking a lot about the nation state that is Canada, and the aesthetics of this nation state.
You're going to call me out on the podcast.
And so I was thinking about what to choose for an organism of the week, and we both agree that the beaver is a very regal symbol.
Yeah, I think
it represents the sovereignty of Canada.
Yeah, it's a lovely symbol.
Yes.
I mean, you saw how excited I got this weekend when I thought I saw a beaver.
Mm-hmm.
Turned out to be just a groundhog. But I love those too.
Yes. So the beaver is the organism of the week. Did you notice something about the color of their teeth?
Looks like pink or red. Pink.
Apparently, beaver teeth are orange.
Oh.
What? So beaver teeth are orange.
I'm colorblind on the podcast.
We didn't learn that. There's 2 species within the genus that is castor, which is the French for beavers, so it's confusing to me. But anyway, 2 species exist. They live all over the northern hemisphere, and they're the second largest living rodents after capybaras, which has been on the show before, sponsoring us.
We're really going all the way through the rodents.
Yeah. Their teeth never stop growing. They are one of the only animals that modify their habitat. So they cut down trees with their teeth, and they create dams, they create shelters. They're herbivores, which I didn't realize. You always picture them like catching fish. But apparently
I've never
not.
pictured that.
I did. But they...
Beavers catching fish.
I don't know.
Close the damn door.
Yeah.
That's my favorite beaver joke.
Mm-hmm. So they are herbivores. They mate for life.
Okay.
Interesting. And their lifespan is 10 to 12 years.
Have you ever seen one in real life?
I have seen a beaver.
And a dam?
I have seen a dam.
Oh.
It's very exciting when you come across one.
I've never seen one. I really, really want to.
Yeah, I'm really into marmots lately, groundhogs.
Yes.
And I feel like they're closely related, but they actually aren't. But anyway.
Have you ever touched a beaver pelt in a store or something like that?
I haven't. But I would love to feel one of their tails.
I think that's part of the big story of Canada with regards to the beaver as an icon of patriotic storytelling. Mm-hmm. Wasn't it because of the trading company and the furs and all that?
I don't think we should get into the fur trade today. But yes, it is a symbol of Canada, perhaps for some of the wrong reasons. But I'm happy to have an animal as a symbol rather than a leaf.
Did you want to get into the story of... Maybe we can talk about it next week, actually. The story of the country.
Okay.
I mean, stories of countries.
Yeah,
national
we don't
anthems,
need to get into the story.
Flags.
Yeah.
Not the particular histories of different countries, but just the idea of it in the modern world, because we talked a little bit about identity on this podcast before. Mm-hmm. Used to be a key part of identity, isn't anymore for the most part.
Yeah.
Now we've got chumps like us critiquing the national flags and anthems and things like this on our 2-bit podcasts.
It's true.
Anyway, next question was about the pros and cons of increased immersion in storytelling. Mm-hmm. I think the pros are quite obvious to this.
Yeah.
Which is that you can experience the art fuller and especially as intended by the artist. Mm-hmm. Like, this is the thing about going to the building and seeing the painting on the roof rather than just seeing a picture of it online, which is still nice, but it's not the exact same because you're not immersed in it. You're not physically there. You're not smelling those old enamels. Or obviously with movies, as David Lynch would tell us so fiercely, we shouldn't watch them on our phones because that's not how they were intended to be made.
Exactly.
And I know musicians are quite firm on, if you're going to listen to it, do it on a nice speaker or with nice headphones or something like that. I mean, you don't have to, but if you want to experience it as fully as possible.
Yeah, exactly. It's a more satisfying experience and more room for the art.
Exactly.
The artistry.
More room in your attention.
Yeah.
Because like with the music, let's say you have the nice headphones on, you can't hear much else. So it's like the whole sense outside of that, the actual song is removed from you. And with movies, it's like, it's a dark room. All you can see is that. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Unless you have Tommy Texter beside you, checking his WhatsApp.
Yeah, don't talk to me about him. I also think this is a bit dramatic, but I feel like it expands our human experience. Like, you probably won't get to all the wonders of the world. You can't get to all the ancient wonders of the world. They don't exist anymore. But in VR, you perhaps could. And I do think there's something to be said about making the most of our time alive and like consuming as much art and as much history and as much interesting things that interest us as possible. And I think VR helps with that a bit.
Right.
But then
if I was offered a VR tour of like ancient Athens tomorrow, I would take it, of course, because I can't go there.
Yeah. But there's obviously a lot of associated threats with that. Threats to humanity.
The cons.
Yes.
Before we get into those, I'm going to refer people to our metaverse episode that we did during the degrowth series. I think it was just called What's Wrong with the Metaverse or something like that.
Yeah.
It was when that was breaking the news. And thankfully, to be honest, it seems like for the time being, at least, pop culture has similarly rebuked it along with us, because I haven't heard much about the metaverse since then. But I'm sure it'll come back in another evil guise at some point.
Yeah.
So, cons of immersion, and especially increased immersion. That's what I was thinking about, because I've thought quite a lot in the past about the form of stories, as in whether you're reading a book or watching a movie or listening to an audiobook. All these things have different levels of engagement with us. Reading, I think, is one of the more active things you can do with regards to stories, because you have to be understanding the words as you look at them. I mean, we've all been there where you're just looking at a page and not actually reading it. But that doesn't really happen with like a movie so often. I mean, you can glaze over, but for the most part, it's a lot easier to watch. I mean, probably the most passive is listening to an audiobook, which is funny because it's just the read out version of the written word. But you can do anything while you're doing that and still be kind of paying attention. And that's something about our senses. But with regards to increased immersion, I think aside from virtual reality, honestly, we're not that much more immersed in stories, in individual stories today than we were, say, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
I think, if anything, maybe our average level of immersion in movies, in books, in audiobooks, in video games, in whatever, it has gone down, because now we are perennially distracted. Our attention spans are smaller. There's like a shocking amount of people who are two screening or double screening, meaning while they watch something, they're reading about it on Twitter or something.
Yeah.
So that's like the opposite of immersion almost. And I think that's really fascinating. Obviously, VR is excluded from this because I don't think it's so widespread yet, or if it will be. But now it's like, it's not so much our experiential spatial immersion that's increasing. It's like our time immersed in the things. Like for Stranger Things, maybe there was a big TV show in the 80s that everyone was watching.
They were engrossed in it.
Yeah, exactly. They were engrossed in it, but also it was a once a week thing and then it's done. But with Stranger Things, I think we can binge it, we can rewatch it infinitely, and you can also be staying in that world and with those characters online by reading about it on Twitter or watching the interviews on YouTube or the bloopers, the outtakes, reading about it. We're immersed in all these other ways.
Yeah.
To take our time, but not so much really our all of our attention, like perhaps things used to more often.
Yeah, I really like that point. It's
like we're never away from the stories, basically, is what it is.
Yeah, it's like you go about your day, you're working in the office 9 to 5, but every hour you're on Twitter and you see a behind the scenes post from someone in the show or what have you, and it's like, oh, and then it makes you think about that for like a couple minutes. And I feel like we don't realize how these disparate moments of like 3 minutes of our thoughts can add up through the day. I recently reread a book called How to Live on 24 Hours a Day, and it really reminded me of this fact because it was written 1919, I think. Like it's very old. So obviously pre-internet, free phones, everything like that. But it was saying you have probably 3 hours a day where you're just thinking. So it's important to, at the beginning of the day, set an intention for your thoughts.
Yeah.
To choose a news story, to choose a idea to meditate on whenever you have your brain wandering. And I've been trying to implement that, but it's so hard because those 4 minutes of free thought are always just occupied with your phone. You're like, it's only 4 minutes. I have 4 minutes before my bus comes. But if you have this intention for the beginning of your day to carry through as like a thread,
it
adds up into 3 hours of thinking about this concept. And then at the end of the day, you have something solid that you can almost show for it.
And I also think that we often make the mistake, fall into the trap of thinking that watching that cast video from Stranger Things is a productive way of thinking, because it's like, well, maybe I'm a creative and I like the Stranger Things, it inspires me or whatever.
Yeah.
And my personal anecdote for that is that I used to be a big Doctor Who fiend. For those who don't know, that's like a long-running sci-fi show from England. It has a lot of global appeal, though. It's about like time traveling and seeing different worlds and aliens and things like this, saving the world generally. And I used to watch that a lot when I was a kid. And I remember like watching it live as it came out, and I would watch it every week with my family every Saturday, I think it was on. And then at like my peak interest from Saturday to Saturday, I was thinking about it a lot, as in like brainstorming episodes and like drawing different creatures and stuff and drawing robots and just generally being creative within the realm of the world. Like I think that's a really positive thing that kids and adults alike can both do. But then I think that as an adult, let's say, if I was still into that so much, the properties, the films, the television that I am interested in now, I spend a little bit more time than when I was a kid genuinely reading about it, the behind the scenes, the production, what the cast is saying, interviews, things like this. And it actually detracts from what was maybe more productive time exercising those creative muscles, rather than what is ultimately quite useless encyclopedic information. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like there comes a point in life that it's like, I think being childish is always good. Like, I think we need to be more childlike, but there is a point where you're 25 and you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you're like, if I am inspired by this, I need to do something about it. I need to make my Doctor Who episode. Yeah.
No, but I mean, if someone isn't in Hollywood, but they want to, like fan fiction is a good example of that. Like, I think that's healthy and productive use of your time. It's like, if you enjoy doing it, it's creative. And I don't mean everyone has to be creative all the time, but I just think sometimes we need to question, as we often say on the show, we need to question the things that we're watching and why we're doing it. Is it just to kind of check off a box? It's like, well, the show's come out, might as well watch the interview. Things like this.
Yeah.
My other point about immersion is like our immersion in the real world, otherwise known as mindfulness. Because while I don't think we're watching movies as intended, maybe as we were when we could only see them in the theaters, i.e. we're not watching movies with the same level of immersion, like that artistic immersion has actually gone down. We're also not as immersed in the world as we used to be. So it's like an intrusion where we're not fully focusing on anything, really. I don't think the word mindfulness being so widespread and so much of an issue is a good thing at all. But there's a lot of practices that are very helpful for people. Meditation, one of them.
For sure. I was preparing for this question, and something I saw listed as a pro was that it was better than reality. Do you agree or disagree with that as a pro?
Well, what are we talking about? What's
like
better than reality?
VR is better than reality. Or watching a movie is better than reality. I disagree with that as a pro. I think it's dangerous.
Yeah, of course.
There's been a lot of studies done on how people feel after using VR, and most people report feelings of worthlessness. And so I was like, okay, because I feel like we keep implementing these technologies without doing adequate research on their long-term effects, because it's really hard to...
Because it's profitable.
Yeah, it's like putting out the new iPhone is better than doing a 20-year study on it. Like, no one's going to do that.
Yeah.
But I feel like we need to be a little more afraid of what it's going to do to us.
I agree.
And as you said with the metaverse, it is good that there's a pushback, but I think how these things proliferate society is by appealing to kids through the
They take the
Happy
minds
Meal.
of the youth. Yeah.
And then when they grow up, they're buying Big Macs.
Ooh.
You know?
Nicely put.
Because I'm sure I don't know about McDonald's. I'll just use that as an example, though. When it came out, adults were probably like, no, I'm not buying this. I'm not going to buy these burgers every meal, even though they're cheap. The kids were into it, and it was easy.
Look at Pokemon.
Yeah.
Like, all our parents used to hate Pokemon, but now we're the parents, so parents now are buying Pokemon because they were raised with it. Like,
exactly.
It's like that.
Yeah. So I fear that with VR. Because it's like, oh no, we realize that it needs to be studied, that it could damage our brains, it could damage our society, it could damage how things function, but then our kids are going to be buying it. And so it's a whole thing.
And again, I'd recommend people listen to the Metaverse episode.
Yeah.
We dismantle it with a little bit more forethought.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you finished with that question?
I had one more that was said, often it's like, okay, VR is good because you can train doctors in rural areas, and you can train for the military, but in reality, it's not actual training, and apparently it does have a lot of, like, people who come out of, like, a correspondence training are less prepared to be in the field. Like, there's probably so many people listening to this who did online school who are like, yeah, I am less prepared than my coworkers who had the online or the in-person experience, but it's like, we don't like to admit it, because it's like, obviously you don't want to feel like you've been gypped, like you've been, like, that you're inadequately prepared for your workplace, but it's like, we need to acknowledge that.
Strive for the best.
Yeah.
Strive for the best.
Yeah, exactly.
So the final question was about what will comedy be like in Solacene. I kind of broke it down into 5 different tenets.
Okay.
So I'll just run through those maybe quite quickly because I'm hungry. And after the episode, we're going to eat. So the order that I wrote them down in, the first one was that the dominant form of comedy in the Solacene will not be anonymous memes, tweets, TikToks, etc., because I don't like the idea that the internet is just this black void and it's making jokes all the time and we don't know who's making them, really.
Yeah.
I remember I'm always thinking about how, I'm sure other people our age and younger will relate, when you find a meme or a video and you just find it. It's like, where did it come from? Out of the void. It's been spat at you by the algorithm.
Yeah.
And it'll be like, I don't know, making fun of someone or like some funny skit, and you show it to your parents or someone older, and they'll maybe laugh with you, maybe they won't, and they'll say, oh, who made that? And you'll be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, there'll be some random Twitter handle, and you'll be like, I don't know who that is. Don't worry about that. It's like, maybe we should think about that a little bit more. And this actually goes along with the second point, which is that comedy will be more local. And if this is like, all comedy is political now, it's like, that's fine, but maybe it should be local politics rather than the seat of power 800 miles away that I don't know anything about.
I had that as a point as well, like local comedy. I think that's important, and it's like, it's hard for us to wrap our minds around that, but I always find the funniest people, not the people on stand-up stages, the people who are in your life who are funny.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing with this is that, like, the reason that I think things like SNL are so big is because the rationale is like, well, we have all the best comedians under one roof, all like in America. So you're never going to get that in your small town. But I kind of disagree, because there's like hundreds and thousands of funny people on the internet. And the internet is actually a good technology for finding these people and letting their cream rise to the top a little bit. Yeah. So you don't need to go to SNL. It's like every city can just have its own SNL, and they'll be roasting local figures, and that will be funny. Like, that's how they used to do it in ancient Athens.
Exactly.
Actually, an example I had for this was our old university has a meme page on Instagram, right? Yeah. And it's very funny.
It is very funny.
Because it's like, these are all things that I know of. But wouldn't it be funnier if that was a stand-up guy at the university? Yeah. It would be funny.
Exactly. I had a lot of thoughts about this, so maybe I'll like revisit some of them next week. But I wanted to see what laughter was, what comedy was, because it seems very strange that it's universal. Like that laughing is just a thing everyone does. People who are born deaf laugh pretty much the same as people who are hearing.
Yeah, it is weird.
Which is like kind of crazy that it's just this natural response, just like yawning or like grunting. And the theory that they have about this is that it's a false alarm theory. So it's like, okay, you're ancient times. There's an approaching threat. The person who's on watch starts making noise and saying, there's a threat coming, there's a threat coming. But then they realize that it's just the guy who was sent out to fetch water 3 days ago returning home. And it's like they don't have language, so they start laughing. And laughing is the response to a broken expectation, which is like what it is. And Kant also theorized about this much more recently. And so it's a lot of, so that's like the core of what comedy is. It's an expectation being broken. It's not something being crude necessarily. It doesn't have to be associated with things that it often is that it often is associated with these days. And I think in the Solacene it'll be a lot less extreme because we'll be less saturated in it. We won't have to
that was
listen
one of my points.
to Pete Skeet Davidson. We don't have to listen to him talking about such extreme things.
The point that I had, well, actually I had 2 points. One was that our lives for the most part will just be more purposeful and meaningful, and we'll be doing work that we actually care about. So our minds won't be wandering. And so everything, like not everything will be comedy. Because now I feel like when you interact with people, everything is just all jokes. Like everything's all laughs and nothing's serious and everything's quite frivolous. And I love laughing. I love comedy, but I just think that life is quite serious. I mean, we should take life seriously, should I say.
Yeah, exactly.
And this doesn't mean that there's no time for gallivanting, because I can gallivant with the best of them.
Oh, yeah.
But I also think that shouldn't be our whole existence. And the other point with this overexposure is things like advertisements. Those are just all, like commercials are just always a joke.
Yeah.
It's like they're not funny.
Yeah.
But we're so bombarded with them that maybe the things that we do find funny become more extreme.
Yeah.
And the other point with this is that satire is quite broken now, I think, in the public sense. Yeah. And in the Solacene, people will have much more of an earnest enthusiasm and appreciation and just trust and belief in the institutions that form the fabric of the world, and the stories indeed. So when it comes time to make fun of them, we'll be laughing, because that's funny. It's satire and it's making fun of church. Like that's what it used to be, right? It's like there's a comedian that's like making fun of church and it's funny and everyone's laughing because it's like we all go to church, but we recognize that these things are silly and stuff. But now it's like no one goes to church, and I'm not just talking religious. It's like now no one really believes in everything, in anything. So we are always like everything's satire now. Everything we say is always just making fun of other things. There isn't anything that we earnestly believe in. And so the idea of going to a dedicated play or movie or stand-up routine that's all satire there's just no point to it. Like all life is satire now.
I agree.
Sounds so like dark.
Yeah. I'll just go through my last points about this in the Solacene, is that I have an idea. We bring back joke books. Did you have joke books at your house? Yes. Yeah, I loved those. I'd love going to a friend's house and they have a new joke book, so their dad would be reading it to us, and it would just be so funny because they were silly, but it was just silly. Like I like being silly. Yeah. Another idea is that everyone, this is obviously an exaggeration, but being in a stand-up troupe or in a theater troupe or in a karaoke night would be a lot more normal. And there would be less, you only do those things if you're
very extroverted
or you're under the influence of some kind of a substance.
Yeah, of course.
Because that makes it exclusive to a decent amount of people, depending on age or preference. And I think that it isn't necessary. I think the reason that it is necessary is because we don't like being silly, physically silly. Like I think we'll bring back kind of physical comedy, and if everyone's in a stand-up troupe, no one's going to be making fun of you.
Well, just physicality in general, and touch, and in the Solacene, we've already talked about people being more comfortable talking in front of people, being on stage, being in groups, just generally a little bit more extroverted.
Yeah. So I think bringing that back, and just being cautious of the power of jokes. I feel like that's how Trump got elected. Obviously, this is a conversation for another day, but I think the power of memes. There was a study done on it they asked a group of people if they would do something bad, because I don't want to go there, but if they would do something bad, and they all said they rated it on a 0 to 100, would they be willing to do it? Then they heard a joke about it or a routine about it, and then rated their willingness, and it all went up. Yeah. So it's like, that's not good. And I think we need to either be cautious going into it that this can have an influence on my beliefs. Or just, change kind of the content of the jokes.
Yeah, comedy can definitely normalize things, and also we are what we pretend to be. So when you just like, oh, I'm not really being mean, I'm just pretending. It's like, actually you are being mean, and if you're not, then you will be soon.
Yes.
My other point about that, like the seriousness of jokes, is that this is like a bonus thought in the Solacene. Hopefully no more joking, or not so widespread at least, about how awful life is, how tired we are, how we want to kill ourselves, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? I really don't like how that's like it's almost like the hello in our generation. It's like like when you get to work or school on Monday.
Yeah.
I don't want to be here.
I'd rather be anywhere else.
Kill
6
me.
feet under.
Kill me now.
Yeah.
Why do we do this?
The sense of this is a whole conversation, but just a lighter sense of humor. Oh, that's a funny shape, as you always say.
Yeah, this is my final thing, and I actually think this isn't just in the Solacene. This is something that I'm noticing in certain places now as on the rise, which is this almost like this new frontier of, I'll call it slapstick nouveau or something like that. The new wave. It's like slapstick and randomness and absurdism, I think, is growing as people get tired of the intertextuality or always reference humor, which is like, oh, you know this thing? That's so funny. Yeah. I think people are kind of, some people anyway, are getting a little bit tired of that, and I think in the years to come, we'll be getting more and more tired of that, and so we'll just start laughing at silly shapes. Or I was thinking about one of the first memes probably I ever sent you was it still makes me laugh thinking about it now. It was called Bees Chugger. Yeah. It was a cheeseburger with the buns and the patty reversed, like flipped. And that was just the whole meme was just the word. And it was just a funny thing. And so that's all it was. Yeah. I think so I think that's funny. It is funny. So I feel like we need another question for next week. I'm trying to think of one. Perhaps how will we tell stories in the Solacene? Something like that. Very big. Yeah. Pretty much the whole topic of the semester. But I mean the medium. Around a campfire. What about this? Create a new medium. Okay. I like that. So thank you all for listening. Field Notes sign up is in the description. We appreciate you all so much. You make my heart very happy. So see you all next week. Bye.